He went to fine schools and so forth and was ultimately drafted into the German army, which he didn't do very well in. He was anti-Nazi, and for his views and for what he did, he was sentenced to death, court-martialed, sent to a German prison, and remarkably, his sentence was commuted to hard labor, 5 years of hard labor in a concentration camp. Part of this legacy that we have is that you stand up for things that are right. If you see an injustice, not maybe you, but if you see someone else getting having an injustice put upon them, you need to stand up and say something. And I think that's part of this whole thing about being in a Nazi uniform and standing up and to the degree where they decide to kill you for it.
German white immigrant parents were just astounded that blacks were treated that way, and that we don't treat people like that. And my father would say, again, they're people. Don't they understand that? That the worst thing you can do is deny person their personhood. And you can beat them, you can kill them, you can do anything, but to deny that person that they are a person is the worst thing you can do.
Bob Neumann was born in 1920 in a small town in northern Germany. Bob's mother was an English teacher and his father a captain of great ships. Both of his parents were opposed to the Nazi Party, as were many of their friends. When his mother and father had friends over for political discussions, Bob listened in, even as a young child. By the time he started high school, Bob himself had developed anti-Nazi views. School officials labeled him as an independent and untrustworthy thinker because he expressed opinions that were contrary to the Nazi propaganda. Bob left home to attend college and then graduate school, where he received a master's degree in psychology. His plans for further study were interrupted when he was drafted into the German Air Force as a private.
And Bob Neumann was a musician of great talent who spoke English like an American. And when Hitler rose to power and Bob was conscripted to be in the army, he made his views known. And his views were not condoning of the regime.
Bob Neumann served in the German Air Force as a clerk assigned to an artillery defense unit stationed in Germany. There, Bob performed quiet acts of physical sabotage for which he was never caught. One of his duties as a clerk was to deliver messages to the front line on a motorcycle. Once, when Bob was ordered out on such a mission, he instead faked a skirmish, firing off some bullets into the air. He then hid out in the forest for a while before returning to base, where his officers assumed he had delivered the message as ordered.
Another thing that I remember him mentioning was that he sabotaged the anti-aircraft lighting, and so that they wouldn't work, or had them pointing in the, I don't know how he had them pointing, if he directed them or something. He was a clerk, but evidently he did some sabotaging to the anti-aircraft lights. So he wasn't court-martialed because of his deeds. They couldn't prove the fact that he did those things with the sabotage. There were a number of officers that testified against him for things he said. It was what he said. He talked about how he made fun of the regime. Instead of raising his hand like everybody did and say Heil Hitler, he would raise his hand, and say Heil Hitlerchen, which is sort of an effeminate way of saying it, making fun of it.
In May of 1944, Air Force commanders brought Bob up on charges of making demoralizing comments about the Nazi Party and its leader, Adolf Hitler. At his court-martial, Bob admitted that the charges against him were true. The court found him guilty, noting that Bob's speech impaired the military's readiness for war. he was sentenced to death by firing squad and sent to a military prison to await execution. A man who had been Bob's friend for many years served in that military prison as a captain. Desperate to save his friend's life, the captain petitioned the court to reconsider Bob's sentence and made an official recommendation of leniency. In support of the petition, the captain presented false testimony to the military judge, claiming that Bob had distinguished himself during an air raid. After hearing the story, the judge agreed to commute Bob's sentence to 5 years hard labor, which he served out in an Austrian concentration camp.
I do feel really, this is such a strong symbol, you know, and it's interesting that you pull the sucker out too, because it is so strong, and it's so much a part of the thing.
It should be on that cup or whatever that is.
I think. In the concentration camp, there was a fellow there by the name of Willy Rosenthal, and he was a painter, and he was staying alive because he was painting, officers and so forth. And my father, being a psychologist, was doing a little therapy with him and said, paint me a painting of how you would feel if you got out of this. And he painted a small painting, watercolor of a man sort of hunched over with a suitcase from the back, large doorways, wet street. And because the figure is moving in that direction, we always like to hang the picture in a place in the house where it's moving towards the brightest light or the biggest opening or the biggest window. And so the largest window in the house is the one in this other room. So it's going towards that out opening, On the day of liberation, these prisoners were so ill that they couldn't walk, and those people were shot. They were literally,
Even after the war was over. Right?
Even after the war was
Death
over,
marches.
they were within visual sight of their liberators. And as they were being walked, they were being shot if you fell over. And a lot of these guys were hallucinating, they were dehydrated. Some of them were 60 pounds. My father was fortunate, he was 80 pounds. And Willy was also in with him, and they had terrible dysentery. And so they were having terrible diarrhea. And he wanted to go off to the side of the road to go to the bathroom. And my father said, no, don't do it. And he said, no, look, the Americans are right over there. And as he stooped over to the side of the road, they shot him, right as he was being liberated.
Shortly after liberation, Bob moved to Berlin. There, he organized a dance band styled after the Glenn Miller Orchestra. Bob both led the band and played the accordion.
His experience, however, in the camp prevented him from ever going back to medical school. Physically, he was not well. He came away with injuries to his body that would not permit him to practice medicine, and so he became a musician.
Bob's band joined a show that entertained American troops stationed in Germany after the war. It was there that he met and fell in love with Hilda, a young acrobat who performed in her family's world-famous bicycling act. Hilda spent a large portion of her family's act upside down, balancing her head on top of her father's head, with her legs extended and her arms spread wide. Joining the tour were many of the biggest names in American entertainment. Among them were Louis Armstrong, Bob Hope, and Fanny Brice. Many of these performers, including Bob and Hilda, socialized with the celebrities after hours. After 2 years of performing together, Bob and Hilda decided to get married.
I'm going to start this project off with your father's big band photo, and your mother's standing on the top of her father's head, up head to head.
Right.
Okay, and they can go on both pictures, or either. What I'd like you to do is, they don't have to be this size, they could be any size, but if the first thing I'd like you to do is to divide up that picture, the three of you, and I'll give us sections. And I think that one, what I want is a straight line that goes from two sides. It starts at one side and it goes to another side. It can crisscross if you want, but it'll give us an idea of where we want to put a photograph for the first move. Which line is it going to be near a touch and why? So we'll find that out. So let's do that. Who would like to break the ice first and make the first line? And that gives us a structure on there, okay? And also gives us a personal decision made by each of you to start. That doesn't mean anything now, but as we go on with the project, we'll start to have meaning. See, he's an artist. He's kind of really moving around.
Yeah, he
saying,
is.
This is
Oh, yeah.
a little bit better over here than there.
He's loving this. He's loving this.
Whoops, okay. Yeah. That's part of the danger of the swinging canvas, makes it exciting.
That's all right. We got it. Come on.
You guys
supposed to be
just
Mom.
remember where they put them.
I don't care.
Okay, okay, once you get
There's no rules.
Making up your own rules?
Yeah, I can use my uncle, can't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
See?
can't do anything.
I thought it was supposed to
See?
be my mom.
It's the act, but we'll have your mom in there.
See?
You'll get it.
There's no wrong in this. Now you know I am an artist, because I can do it.
Hey, I already got my space, so stay out of my space. I got this point.
Okay, okay, right there. We're getting taped, so we'll tape it up.
That's all right.
Okay, I like that. Eventually we'll get the whole act, because she might have, do you have the mom there? She has the
I
mom.
have her right here, and I
So
know
when
where
that hits,
she's going.
okay.
See,
You'll have them
you
all.
take
You'll have
good
them all.
care of Mom.
Our teeth.
Yeah.
You know, and when Louis Armstrong took my mother out for ice cream, my grandfather yelled at Louis Armstrong, sort of, you know, jokingly said, "Don't ever take her out again because I gotta lift her." So enough with the ice cream. These I would like to put someplace as my mother's teeth.
Okay. It's like in there. Okay, cool.
In 1956, Bob and Hilda Neumann decided to emigrate to the United States with their 2 young sons, Klaus, then 5, and Mike, 2. The couple settled in Minnesota, where a 3rd son, Tom, was born, the first in the family to be an American citizen.
And we ended up in Fairmont, Minnesota. We had a sponsor then at that time, and that's how you got over here, was with a sponsor. And this sponsor was a man of the community, and he had offered my father a job at a store, and we were the refugees. When he was young, he read the book Lederstrumpf, which is Last of the Mohicans in German, and he always wondered about the free America. He always wanted to see the free America. And when we came over, he saw the Mississippi for the first time and broke down and cried.
And the story is, the story of that is that we were going across the Lake Street Bridge in a car. We were on the Lake Street
The
Bridge.
old Lake Street Bridge.
The old Lake Street Bridge, which is it's kind of rickety.
Yeah.
And we're on the Lake Street Bridge. My father, and American Indian law is a big thing for European children, males mostly, the Wild West and everything. But this part of the country, a lot of people know about, the history of this country and the Native Americans that were here, and he knew all about it. And when he saw that river, he stopped the car, got out of the car, and started crying. And my mom, we were in the car. I don't remember this personally, but Mom told me this story. And she said, we were in the car, she was in the car, and then people started to stop the cars, and they thought he was gonna jump. They thought he was crying on the side of a bridge. So they were like thinking, oh, this guy's gonna jump, but he wasn't. He was just so overwhelmed, he couldn't drive.
So they would have come in November, and there's the bridge that they crossed. It's the Lake Street Bridge where you first saw it. Downtown Minneapolis, University.
Wherever we went, especially kids being kids, they'd call each other's names and stuff like that. And when they used to call us Nazis. Oh, you're from Germany, you little Nazi, right? Oh, you Nazi this, you Nazi that, And they didn't understand what they were telling us. They didn't understand. They just didn't understand. How could they know? So that was hard. But I think the hardest one was in 6th grade, 5th grade, Mrs. Erickson at Douglas Elementary School off of Franklin Avenue in Hennepin. It's not there anymore, they tore it down. Okay. 5th grade, first day of school, she pulled me aside into the cloakroom, and she says, I'm going to keep my eye on you, you little Nazi. She said, I know what your people did to my people, and I'm not going to put up with you in my class.
Wow.
So
To
go
my
sit
people,
down.
to my people meaning to the American people?
No, she was, I guess she was Danish.
Danish?
She was,
Okay,
she was an American, but her ancestry
understand.
was Danish.
Sorry for interrupting.
And, oh, no, not at all. And then she told me to go sit down, and I thought, I didn't quite understand what just happened there.
Were other kids around at this time? Did
No,
they
she
hear
pulled
that?
me aside in the
Oh,
cloakroom by
okay,
myself,
okay.
just the two of us.
Okay.
And she was like in my face with it. I could have easily, should have easily gone to my father with this. But my dad would have become so unglued. I think there would be so much carnage in that school because of the stink that he would put up and all that. And I didn't want to be part of that.
Achilles heel, I think the Achilles heel for Klaus and I, knowing what my father, at a young age, this big story of difficult life for my family, both sides of my family, my father, is something that it just is part of us. It's like a wrapper that is on you from birth. That you don't know when you were aware of it. You were just aware of it the whole time that this terrible, terrible thing happened. It really affected a lot of people other than your own family, and you're extraordinarily aware of it. And so, and the Nazis were the cause of it, And so for other children to turn that onto us, and our feeling was our father was a hero. Our father was one of the ones that was against it. Our father actually almost died, and ultimately probably did die because of this. As a thank you, and the sponsor that we had worked through the Lutheran Welfare Federation, which had the program to sponsor people to come to the United States. And so we wanted to make a nice German dinner for a thank you for the sponsor, and there were other civic leaders that were involved somehow, maybe 4 or 5, and they came to our house for dinner. And the first gaff really was my father's, because at that time Fairmont was a dry town. You couldn't buy alcohol in Fairmont. So my father said, "Don't worry, we have beer," because I went 20 miles away to get beer, and we have beer. Well, unbeknownst to him, the people, these civic leaders that were at our house were the ones that helped make the town go dry. So that didn't go over well. But you know, a German guy cannot imagine living anywhere where you can't get beer.
Dad told Mom,
Oh, yeah.
you see that man over
told
there?
him.
Say hello to him. He's a retired judge. So my mom walked over, and of course my father being a psychologist, right?
Yeah.
My mom goes over and says, hello, I'm Hilda Newman. My husband tells me you're retarded. That's how it went. That's how it went.
Glad we brought you with. I met a nice Jewish girl. I didn't know she was Jewish. You know, in fact, the fellow that introduced her to me, I didn't know he was Jewish.
On our first date, when we talked about this and he started telling me his family's story, I felt like, how could this be that this person understands this the way I understand this? You know, I mean, it was really so touching to me that we were on the same wavelength about these, and sort of formulated my anxieties regarding the Holocaust and being Jewish and that kind of thing. Came from watching newsreels when I was starting probably when I was 8 years old, and in Hebrew school they'd, you know, at certain times of the year we'd all go down to the social hall and they'd show newsreels of the Holocaust, you know, people like Americans coming and freeing
People out of camps.
the camps, and you know, the people standing in front of the fences, and they were just skeletons. And you know, I remember just looking at those pictures and looking into those eyes and wondering if any of those people were my relatives, or who were those people. That could be me. You know, I mean, they were kids who were the same age as I was watching that, and it just tore me apart.
Nancy was talking about how it was interesting for her to be on the flip side of this feeling about World War II and about Nazism and the angst that comes with that. I've always felt that all my life. You know, I've always had this issue with food, with being afraid of what happens if we hear the sound of marching boots. Where do the railroad lines go? You know, how do I get out of here? You know,
My mother was hiding during the war as a Jew in South France, and she transmitted that sense that you are describing, right, of emergency, having to find, you know, a way out, an alternative, and so on and so forth. And it's as if I grew up with the sound of boots as well, because she described a lot during my childhood the sound of German boots.
I remember our grandmother would take the butter, and then once the butter was gone, she would take a knife and she would scrape every last piece of butter off of that thing, and then she would take the crumbs that were on the table from the Brötchen or whatever she was eating, and she would put that on that, and so every single crumb would be eaten. There was, you know, you don't throw stuff away. When I was dating my wife, and we were blissfully living in sin together for a few years before we got married, and she had a chicken. When we got done eating, she was in the kitchen and she started taking all the meat off the bones, and I'm just sitting there watching her, and she took every scrap of meat off those bones. And then she took the bones and then she put them in someplace else. And I looked at her hands and I saw my mom's hands.
Like I said, you know, I feel like I've had this sort of, you know, kind of cocoon thing about me, that all of this knowledge of terrible stuff that happens to people and happened to my relatives. I wasn't there, but I feel like it, like they brought me with a little bit. But anyway, one of the acts that they worked with was this monkey act. You know, you had animal acts, you know, and there was an act where the monkey, you know, the monkey was on stage and it had a little bedroom sort of scene, you know, and the monkey it was a chimpanzee, would go and turn back the covers and go into bed, and then and gets back out of the bed and then kneels by the bed and pretends to say its prayers, you know. Then it goes back into the bed, covers itself up, turns off the light. Then the light comes back on. The monkey gets out of the bed, and underneath goes and gets a chamber pot underneath the bed, sits on the chamber pot, you know, puts the chamber pot back, and gets into bed and turns off the light, and that's the end of that part of the act. These people, they play tricks on each other sometimes, and what somebody did is they put a plum in the chamber pot, unbeknownst to the animal trainers. And so at the time when it was time for the monkey to do the chamber pot thing, and the monkey pulls out the pot, sees the plum, reaches in and eats it. So I like to have something that's whimsical, something that reminds me of the fact that you can't let go.
See if you can hang it somewhere.
The fact that you can't let go of your humor, that you need.
That's right.
You need humor. You need things like that in your life to make it through sometimes the tough parts.